equal for people who do not profess any religion, who are not theists, who do not believe that there is some power beyond human beings that we have to make nice to. I have to say, I am somewhat put off. I'm being counted what I'm about to say now, because I don't think we should be critical of religion in public. But we're hanging out together here, so it's a little bit. I think one of the great mistakes made by both the Roman Catholic Church and my own tradition, Judaism, was putting things into the vernacular. Frankly, I think that stuff is much more impressive as poetry in Latin and Hebrew than when you read it. I mean, I go to a lot of religious services. I've been to more masses than almost all of my Catholic friends because I particularly made a point of attending any funeral service for anybody who died in a war that happened while I was in Congress. Toughest days I spent were those where people had died in the Afghan War, which I voted for out of a sense of necessity. And I think being reminded of what the consequences are is a very important thing to keep in mind when you vote again about this kind of thing. And I read the religious stuff, and it is a focus on a God in both religions who apparently has an insatiable desire for praise. So I think the question is, how do we get away from that? First of all, we do it by not dwelling on that. I was semi-drunk when I said to Benoit on another possible atheist. I'm not going to describe myself as an atheist. Atheism expresses more certainty than I have. And basically, in my case, intellectual attitude. If it's absolutely unknowable, don't bother me with it. I have no instinct to debate things that don't exist, can't exist. I don't know whether they exist or not, and they don't make a difference to me. So the question is, how do you do it? Well, let me say a couple things. First of all, I don't think the situation is as bad as people think. It depends on how you frame it. I just wrote a memoir. And one of the things I recounted in it was a very important situation in America that we should go back to and talk more about and have people know the implications of. It's the Terry Schiavo case. I was sitting at home in my apartment in New Massachusetts one, I think it was like Easter, which I suppose was appropriate for people who thought Congress could bring her back from the dead. But we got a summons to Washington to vote on the bill by which Congress would override the decisions of the courts in Florida, every level of court, and basically compel the hospital to ignore the wishes of her husband, which he said, without contradiction, had been her wishes, and allow her to die. This was not euthanasia, but to just stop the feeding tube. She'd been laying inert. It later turned out, by the way, Senator Bill Frist, a very eminent art surgeon, who was then trying to get the Republican nomination for president, said that he had been watching her on television, and he could tell that she would make eye contact.
I remember
that.
Diagnosed her.
It turned out that she had long since lost any brain function. Her eyes were not connected to anything. There was nothing going on there. But here's what happened. We were summoned to Washington. I got there, and it was in the jurisdiction of the House Committee on the Judiciary. I wasn't a member. The Senate had voted on the bill earlier. And in the Senate, the bill passed unanimously. I was later told by Senator Kennedy on the committee, because I had to fight against it. He said, "You're a good friend with that. I'm jealous." He said, "I wanted to fight it, but the Democratic Senate leadership prevailed upon him not to make a fight because too many Democratic senators were afraid to choose which side they were on." And we took the bill up in the House, and some of us fought it. It went through under the procedure which requires a 2/3 vote. It got about a 300 and something to 60 the little as 200 and something, 60, because other members ducked the vote. And as I conducted the floor debate, by the way, it was one of the best debates in recent times for a very simple reason. I mentioned this in the book. It happened on a Sunday. Members were summoned to Washington, and nobody had time to get a staffer to write a speech. So the members actually had to get up and talk to each other. It was that whole time, instead of a series of pre-written speeches that just went over each other. And I don't know if that's around somewhere. Somebody ought to go get that footage. It was very well done. But of course, the argument was essentially a religious one. How dare human beings interpose between this woman and God? God will decide when she's taken. I later debated that. Had one African in that position tell me that even if it was clear that she had wanted to be allowed to die, that was wrong. And the man who made that argument so vigorously, whom I was debating in Dublin, was Pat Boone, who probably resonates more with a lot of these people than punk rock. Doesn't from the audience. Somebody said, boy, that was kind of weird. You debated Pat Boone, and somebody else said, yeah, well, it was better listening to two of them sing. So, but go back and read that in the congressional record. Was it 2005 or I forget what it was, but it was absolutely a theological debate. And we had the perception in Congress that the theistic side was overwhelmingly popular. And I had, three Republicans voted no out of a couple hundred. And half the Democrats voted for the bill. And a number of Democrats came up to me on the floor, I was the floor manager, and said, geez, you're right, but I'm afraid of this. The general political perception, which I shared, I figured I was on the wrong side politically, but I'm not going to worry about it in my district. And so the bill passed overwhelmingly. George Bush flew home from Texas to sign the bill in Washington. So he was sure that he'd signed the bill in his pajamas, which I must tell you, called to my mind another cultural reference that will appeal to much of this audience. Groucho Marx as Captain Spaulding. Last night I shot an elephant in my pajamas. What he was doing in my pajamas, I'll never know. It occurred to me when Bush signed the bill in his pajamas. But that was the one in which he sang the famous couplet. My name is Captain Spaulding, the African explorer, and someone called me Schnorrer. Anyway, we that night went home thinking that the American public was going to be very critical of those of us who voted to allow the husband to order the hospital to allow this brain-dead, inert life form to not be artificially fed anymore. And the country exploded in rage at those who had voted for the bill. There were two times in my life when I was thanked walking around the streets by strangers for something I had done in Congress. The only previous time was when I helped forestall the impeachment of Bill Clinton. I had people stop me and say, let me understand this. Those jerks were going to tell me what I would do if my mother was sick? They're going to tell my kids how to respond to me? There was an explosion of anger on the part of the American people. It ended in Bill Frist's presidential campaign. Frist was a very able man, he was the Senate Majority Leader, and it ended his presidential campaign. Now I cite that because part of what that means is our job is easier than you might think. It's to connect the dots. It's not to change attitudes, it's to connect them. That notion that there was a religious obligation to intervene in human affairs angered most of the American people. And I really urge people that questions about it, get articles about that, write about that, have that publicized it, show people what the implications are of the view that religion should govern our public affairs as opposed to being purely a personal guide. And the public's on our side on this, increasingly. Now, the question is, how best to do it? Well, in the first place, as I said, Ranker can be fun. Forego it. I understand. You get those emails. You mentioned those emails. You know what, though, I gotta tell you this. I never heard of an email that meant itself to you. Just ignore them. Delete them. Pay them no attention. In fact, I got to the point where, the only thing that made me regret retiring was that the biggest church would be happy. And I loved, remember Franklin Roosevelt on the economic world list? They hate me, and I welcome their hate. I mean, that sounds nice, but that's an appropriate response to that fringe. But with the others, here's the big argument. When you're in a political campaign, let me put this way, you're lobbying in the Congress. When you're lobbying the other members, we have the whip team. The whip team goes and asks people, to try and find out what we're going to do in the bill. And all parties are the same. And some of the people do this when they're doing voter canvassing. You have a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A 1 is with you, a 5 is against you, a 2 is leaning your way, a 4 is leaning the other way, a 3 is in the middle. When we get together, priority goes to the 3s and 2s. If you have any time left over, you go to the 4s. You ignore the 5. If you're campaigning, you're going door to door, and somebody says you're terrible, say goodnight. I mean, I wasn't always good at arguing with people. But that's the thing. We don't need overwhelming majorities, except the fact that there are some people who aren't going to be with you. Focus on the people who are open to persuasion, and don't insult them. Don't insult their religion. Religion means a lot to people. Don't make fun of it. Don't respond in kind. It's just counterproductive. It makes you feel good, I understand that. Okay. But I have a rule for people. I developed it out of the LGBT political movement, but it applies to other movements as well. If you are engaged in a political cause, which is very important to you, and you are asked to join in an activity which is great fun and makes you feel wholly engaged and reinforced and warm, you're in solidarity with all those who agree with you, you are almost certainly not helping. You're engaged in a kind of massive reinforcement. I'm not criticizing preaching to be converted, by the way. Although obviously in this case you have to, well, you can be converted too. You don't have to get converted to religion. Preaching to the converted is a very important thing to do, which depends on what you preach. I'm preaching, I hope, to the converted who believe in promoting the argument that whether or not someone is a theist is irrelevant. I guess that's what we're arguing. That it's irrelevant to whether they are someone who can be trusted, whether they are good people, whether they should be hired, or whether they should be voted for. We are arguing for the irrelevance of a theistic situation, except to the individuals involved, similar to, in this case, what we argue with regard to sexual orientation. Although sexual orientation is probably is best if it involves at least one other person, but with theism, you just, people can be married and be perfectly different on the question of going to church, but don't argue, don't argue, yes, but don't be abusive, don't make fun, don't respond in kind, leave the bigots alone, ignore them. But I do believe that with a very large number of American people, including some who are themselves deeply theistic and religious, they are prepared to understand. And you start with the Shiloh case. People argue, oh, you need to be religious to be a good person. Well, look what being religious led to in the Shiloh case. Is that many of the people who are self-professingly the most religious to interfere. Now, we're not arguing that everybody could be religious and not have that kind of religion. But we go from there and say, and probably empirical, look at all the people who've done good things. I think we are arguing for the irrelevance of people's own personal religious view. And doing that in a way that is respectful of religious views, that it's a matter of personal choice. You don't want to trivialize it. It's not simply a taste for food. It's something that can be very profound for people. And that, I think, if we do it that way, we win. That is, you don't approach it by attacking religion. You approach it by making explicit what I think a lot of people really believe, that what's important to you in another person, your interaction with that individual, how they will treat you, how they will treat others, is not determined by whether or not they have a particular religious view or no religious view, and that is something that you can respect and you don't get into. And I think that will win us more. And I was just thinking, what are you going to talk about? And I thought about the shadow case. And I really urge, in fact, for the magazine, you ought to go back, look at that debate. You know, somebody ought to do a documentary. Somebody ought to just get that debate on the shadow case. And it makes our case. That it was the non-theistic approach. It was the humanist approach. That is, what's good for Terry Shiloh laying there? This woman who has now been destroyed. What's good for her husband?